On the morning of February 24, Operation Sabre, the long-awaited coalition ground offensive, began. While the United States and its coalition partners unleashed General Schwarzkopf's Hail Mary, the Iraqis were convinced that the battle would be joined at the center of the defensive lines along the Saudi-Kuwait border and by amphibious assault. What the Iraqis could not realize was that the Allies had secretly moved two entire corps of American forces, supported by British and French divisions, far to the west, in one of the largest and swiftest battlefield troop movements in history.
When the ground war began, we were going to take the left hook into Iraq to the airfield. And what we had done from Saudi Arabia, I don't know if you've heard of the road march at the 1st Cav Division, the mechanized road march, which was, I forget how many miles, but it was like the biggest mechanized division move in history. It took us hours. I mean, we would traverse the gun over the back and swap the driver out with the loader so the loader could drive for a while. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, you'd refuel on the move.
This giant end run by more than 250,000 soldiers, spread over several hundred miles, moved deep into Iraqi territory from the Saudi border, behind the Iraqi forces, to deliver a fatal left hook. The flanking maneuver not only cut off all avenues of retreat north and west of Kuwait, it fulfilled Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Colin Powell's prediction that the coalition, specifically the American military, were going to cut off the head and kill the Iraqi army. As the end run began, the Marines were tasked with going for the jugular. After performing their own deception by shifting both Marine divisions some 40 to 50 miles northeast from their original staging area, the Marines stepped off into battle. The 1st and 2nd Marine divisions, each more than 18,000 strong, and the U.S. Army 1st Brigade, 2nd Armored Division, plunged into the attack.
I just remember crossing, going into the other country, and I'm watching the tanks firing. I'm watching artillery land around myself. I had one land approximately 20, 30 feet from my vehicle, and I mean, my vehicle was a 26-ton, again, armored personnel carrier. And I mean, when it hit, it shook us like I was in a little soda can. I mean, the troops below, the infantry below, they were all freaking and panicking. I had them pulling on my leg and all that.
On their way, the Marines had to cross two belts of minefields, 12-foot-high sand berms, barbed wire defenses, booby traps, and fire trenches, all the while under sporadic attack by Iraqi artillery. These impenetrable barriers were quickly breached by the Marine teams.
We were actually sitting at the border of Kuwait. They had what they had done was built up a berm, or they had used like, you call them bulldozers, and pushed up this big, like 10-foot wall of just dirt, like a big berm. And basically what they told us is when we go into Kuwait, we're going straight up the middle. Like you said, they did have some units that was going to come around and flank them. Our job was to just go straight up the front.
As the two Marine divisions advanced, two Saudi and Qatari task forces moved up Kuwait's east coast in a similar drive. The initial Marine advance was described by Schwarzkopf in his February 27th briefing as follows. It was a classic, absolutely classic military breaching of a very, very tough minefield, barbed wire, fire trench type barrier. They went through the first barrier like it was water. Then they brought both divisions streaming through that breach. Absolutely superb operation, a textbook, and I think it will be studied for many, many years to come as the way to do it.
It's one of the things where we've all worked together, so it worked out where, it was almost like a courtesy. If there was another vehicle coming, you let him go, and and then he gets through, he's going back to his unit. Because the military, especially Marine Corps, is all about formation. You break formation only if you need to, and so, to get through the little area, once you got through, you get back in your formation where you're supposed to be and keep continuing forward, which is the time, like I said, when the artillery, the tanks started taking gunfire and we started taking fire, and we had, we drove past blown up tanks. You can drive by and you look down, you can see tanks smoking where they've been blown up. And again, it's one of them things where it's just surreal. You never really think about the fact that, something could have been me. Somebody could have blew me up and I wouldn't have seen it coming. It would have been 1 second you're here and all of a sudden you're not.
Overhead, Cobras, Harriers, and Intruders provided close air support as the Marines pushed forward, meeting occasional resistance. Marine aircraft attacked in waves as engineers continued to shoot line charges and drop bundles of plastic pipes near trenches so the blade tanks could form makeshift bridges. Even though the 1st Division Marines encountered artillery fire and a mechanized counterattack, their attack proved unstoppable. Most Iraqis had fought for only a few minutes before surrendering. Massive artillery and air support from Navy and Marine aircraft sparked a frenzy of surrender that at times slowed the progress of advancing Marine units.
That goes to President Bush. That goes to Bush.
In the POWs that we detained, I mean, there was no fight. Beat down, just wore out. You know, a lot of them probably were fighting because they had to, not because they wanted to. It wasn't like a professional fighting force like us, you know, where that's what we do professionally. So, I mean, they did hold their own in the vehicles they had for what they had, but I mean, you know, we gave them a significant pounding before the ground wars.
The 2nd Marine Division enjoyed equal success, with the Army's Tiger Brigade on the west flank, the 8th Marine Regiment to the east, and the 6th Marine Regiment in the center. The division kicked off its attack. Within hours, they too had breached both defensive belts. Facing enemy mortar and small arms fire, the 2nd Division drove into Kuwait and took more than 5,000 EPWs by the end of the first day. As Marines continued their attack, the sea-based arm of the Navy Marine Corps team continued to provide support. The battleships continued rapid, responsive gunfire on targets designated by Navy and Marine spotters on the ground and in the air. The amphibious task force in the Persian Gulf continued to demand difficult decisions from the Iraqi generals. Because of the threat of an amphibious landing and the uncertainty of where and when it would land, 10 divisions, totaling 80,000 men, stood motionless in defense of the Kuwait coastline. Troops that could have blocked ground forces circling the exposed Iraqi right flank. In addition, the garrison troops and equipment on Bubiyan and Failaka Islands, which command sea approaches to vital areas. On the 2nd day of the ground war, both Marine divisions faced sporadic resistance as they pushed further into Kuwait. The real threat to the coalition's battle plan came from the burning oil.
I was approximately, I'd say 500 feet, maybe 1,000 feet behind the tanks when we actually, as far as the ground troops, I was there when the oil fires started. The oil fires is what I think really messed us up, you know, as far as us on the ground. I remember, again, specifically one night, well, actually it was daytime, it was 12 noon, and it looked like it was 12 midnight. We couldn't see right in front of us. There was vehicles running into each other. You could just hear the radio. People, you know, it was just so much confusion, and I'm sure that was what Saddam had in mind to do. And honestly, for about a day, it did work pretty well, because again, you know, we were pounding him and doing our thing. But once the oil fire started, all the smoke where you really couldn't see anything, and we, being again our personnel carriers, we just had to stop. They just came out of the radio. Everybody just stop where you're at. Don't move. Don't do anything. And we just sat there for about 24 hours. It wasn't until the next day that the smoke kind of cleared and, you know, the wind, I guess, adjusted. And we all came out and looked around, and our vehicles were almost nowhere near a formation. We were vehicles inches from hitting each other, didn't know it. You know, it was just so much confusion. But again, I'm sure that's what he had in mind, was to confuse us. But we just, I mean, I guess someone made the command decision, look, you know, he's trying to confuse us, let's stop, recuperate, and, you know, work things, you know, get ourselves together and then continue. And it just so happened the next day the smoke had cleared, you know, to where we could actually see. It was still a little smoky, but you can actually see. And just, you know, it was just amazing how we had barely, you know, dodged a bullet, pardon the pun, from, you know, ramming each other. And, you know, we almost took each other out. So.
They fought some intense battles along the way, and by the time Kuwait's international airport was secured on the 4th day of the ground war, the 2 Marine divisions had defeated an Iraqi force of 11 divisions.
when I talked to you all before, and you asked me what we were going to do if we had to go to war, and I told you we were going to kick ass, and that's exactly what we did.
At 0800 Persian Gulf time, February 28th, American forces ceased offensive combat operations by order of the President.
Actually, we halted before the airport. When we did the division move, we moved north through Saudi Arabia into Iraq and made the left hook and then stopped. The mission from Schwarzkopf basically told first team to finish it off and let's go home. And now I will say at that time, a lot of people were pretty disappointed because by that time, everybody's pumped up, ready to go. And, we had no idea that they were going to call a ceasefire, I mean, that was just like, what? And it was pretty quick after that everything just settled down. And we got so far, you're right at the 10-yard line.
In 100 hours of offensive combat, the Marines and one Army brigade, supported by Navy, Marine, and coalition aircraft, destroyed or damaged 1,060 tanks, 608 artillery pieces, 5 frog launchers, and 2 Scud launchers, and captured more than 20,000 Iraqi soldiers.